Hello and welcome to Warden Hilltop's digital photography photo editing video tutorial. And today I will be looking into two programs, Adobe Photoshop and Adobe Lightroom. I usually use Photoshop and Lightroom as complementary programs, and it's important to know that though both programs have similar features and functions for editing photos, there are certain editing techniques and effects that are specific to each program. This video tutorial is very limited and selective in the effects and techniques included when compared to the full set of functions that each programs have to offer, but I've chosen to include editing techniques that I find myself using most. Generally speaking, Photoshop is a more comprehensive editing and design program that is used in a wide array of visual arts ranging from photography, illustrations, digital paintings, poster design, etc. Whereas Lightroom, on the other hand, is a more particularly used for photo editing. So let's begin with some basic techniques in Lightroom 4. And here I've already opened up one of the photos that I've done this past summer in one of the weddings that I did here. You can notice right off the bat that the dress is quite overexposed, and the detail is pretty much lost on the dress. And my favorite thing with Lightroom is that it really sets out the different tones. So you have here on your right side, you have highlights, shadows, whites, and blacks, and it does a really good job in recovering lost detail. For example, in the dress, the overexposure have lost pretty much all the detail that you would have otherwise in the dress. But the way I fixed this is that I would turn down the highlights as much as pleasingly possible, and then I'd also turn down the white midtones, and now we can see that some of the details in the dress are showing. That darkened the photo, and what I can do to offset that as well is to put up my shadows so that it wouldn't be as dark, and my dark tones, so blacks here I can also put higher or brighter. So I'm pretty happy with that exposure, but what I can do furthermore is under this tab here where it says presence, I can play around with this line that says clarity, and this pretty much brings out the detail to a more crisp and clear state, as you can see here. So as you put it high, you can tell that there is a lot more detail present. So just notice what happens here if I do slide it to the negative though, and it just becomes really cloudy. So we want to put this on positive so that the details really shine through, or show through rather. There you go. So that is a very easy way to fix exposure in Lightroom, which is a lot more comprehensive, and it's able to isolate all the different kind of tones better for you than Photoshop would. Photoshop, on the other hand, is very simplistic in a way that you can only kind of tweak the contrast and shadows and brightness and all that stuff holistically. So it doesn't break it down in your highlights, your midtones, and your shadows like Lightroom does, but works in a very much more holistic way. So as you can see here, if I turn my brightness slide, so everything else is going to be brightened up, and it's not isolated in a way that I can only look into midtones or shadows or highlights. So as you can tell here, it's not doing a great job in bringing out the details out of the dress, much like what you would be able to do in Lightroom. The most important tab here for editing your your shots in Photoshop would be the image tab. So keep in mind that each time you are editing in Photoshop, that things work in layers, and you have when you have multiple layers, you'd have to make sure that you have that particular layer that you want to work on highlighted. Otherwise, the edits will not apply to that layer. So go on ahead and choose your layer, and your image tab here will contain pretty much all of the, or most of the basic edits that you would be looking into, like brightness and contrast and levels and curves and exposure, etc., etc. So let's look at noise reduction techniques. And if I zoom here, I mean it's a pretty clear shot, but as we move in closer, we can see that there is slight noise on the groom's suit here, and the way in which you can fix that is by going to filter, clicking on the filter tab here, and then going on to noise and reduce noise, and you will get your pop-up here. And play around with the slides to achieve the kind of smoothness that you would like, but basically that's how you would be able to clean noise in Photoshop. And once you are happy with the details, just go on ahead and click OK, and it will soften up that level of noise. And again, Lightroom is much more simple in a way compared to Photoshop, and not everything is laid out for you here on the sides. If you want to clean up noise, so let's just go ahead and reset this to the original shot. And once we zoom in to the groom's jacket here, we can see the noise, and to clean that up on Lightroom, we would have to go to, on your right hand side here, noise reduction, and your luminescence bar here, or slide rather, would be the control that you would need to play around with. So notice how on the groom's jacket there, as I move my luminance furthermore to the right, that grain texture becomes a lot smoother than it was. So I'm just going to turn this back again to 0 compared to a higher setting towards the right to 68. Okay, so let's just zoom out, and that would be how you would fix noise or reduce noise in Lightroom. Okay, so a lot of my clients like certain looks, and what looks are basically certain kind of feel that you would get off of looking at an image. And one of the more popular looks is the vintage look, and so you can create the vintage look using both Lightroom or Photoshop. So let's go through Photoshop first and see, or rather go through the steps that you would need to take to create a vintage look. So here we have the original shot, and vintage shots or vintage photos tend to have kind of a dull or off-color rendition of the image, meaning that there are fading out of colors, and usually blacks and darker colors are more affected. What I like to do to try to get that vintage look in Photoshop is by going to the image tab here and clicking adjustments, and then choose selective color. And what this does is to lull your blacks. So play around with it and see which one you would like. And vintage shots or vintage images tend to have a warmer feel to them, meaning a bit more to the yellowish or more the orange or red kind of side or tinge. And again, like I said, to get that vintage feel or look, it's a must that you would lull down the blacks to be more flat rather than rich blacks or darks. So even now you can tell that it's beginning to look a bit more vintage than it originally was. So click OK, quite happy with that. As well as neutrals. And vintage shots tend to be less contrasty. And one of the other effects that I like to add when I'm trying to get a vintage look on Photoshop, once I do the selective color feature or technique, is adding a vignette. And vignettes are the darkening of the edges of a photograph that is found in a lot of older photos. So to do that, you would have to go to Filter and pick Lens Correction. And then once you are in this window, what you would need to click on is Custom and Vignette. And just play around with how much vignetting you would want to add, and I think I'm quite happy with that. And of course, midpoint brings the darkening closer to the center or further out into the margins. I think I'm quite happy with that. And there is the vintage look on Photoshop. Versus the original and vintage. Lightroom is a lot easier because your interface lets you get onto specific effects and functions very easily. Instead of going to the tabs here, everything is laid out for you on the side. So to get a vintage look, what I like to do is look into my presence here, and I'm going to just put that a little higher. And of course, we're going to try to pull out the dress's details by putting our highlights down. and our whites down as well, but that has darkened our photo, so what I'm going to do is put my shadows a bit to the positive side and my blacks to the positive side as well, and get the temperature to the warmer side by using my temperature slider here to be a bit more towards the right. The next thing that we got to do is lessen the punch of the colors here, as vintage images tend to kind of have a bit of a fading out of colors. So I'm just going to dumb that down a little bit. And last finishing touch is the vignette. There we go. And I'm also going to play around with the midpoint of it. Maybe closer in like that. And there we go. So that is the... So now let's compare the original to the edited vintage photo in Lightroom. So that's the original. It's also very easy to do black and white photos here on Lightroom because everything is preset. For black and white photography, you can just easily turn your color photos by using either the presets set out on the left here, or you can otherwise take the colors out using your slides on the right. So I'm gonna get all the detail from the dress out first. There we go. My clarity up a little bit. Okay. So once you move your vibrance to the left, it takes out your color, and likewise saturation. And there is your black and white. And once you're in full-blown black and white, you could play around with the contrast to make it more punchy or a bit more. You can also play around with the presets and see which ones you like. And once you choose a preset, you can further do more edits by going to the right side here and playing around with your slides. There you have it, turning color photography into black and white in Lightroom. In Photoshop, it's just as easy. You go to your image, adjustments, vibrance, and just turn on that slide to your left. There's the saturation. Choose the proper layer there. Let's just repeat that. In Photoshop, just go to Image, Adjustments, and Vibrance, and turn down your vibrance and saturation to get a black and white version of your photo. You can also simply click black and white, like so. And the other option is to turn your mode into grayscale. But the problem with this is that you now lose out on all the color information. So if you go to grayscale like this, it permanently takes out all of the colors, and if you would like to go back to color afterwards, you won't be able to. So as this window is prompting you, it's telling you that all the colors will be discarded permanently, and so that's why I usually choose the other options. And there you have it. Those are the techniques that I use a lot in my editing, and I hope that this has been helpful in introducing you to some of the things that Photoshop and Lightroom can do for your photography. Thank you.